Welcome to the Religious Nut and Hellbound Center podcast. I'm your host, the Religious Nut, James.
I'm the Hellbound Center, Chris.
Hello, and this is episode 5. This one will be Jesus and Evil. Da da da!
Please don't you close this club. I got nowhere to call home.
So, how have you been, Kingy?
I'm alright. Not too much happening lately. Can't complain. I mean, I can, but I won't.
Well, good. If you can't complain, and if you can't, or, yeah, whatever, anyway.
I confused you. Yes.
Yeah, I was so confused. Well, it's not hard to confuse me. I had the flu last week, which is why we've been a little bit behind as of late. It's the first time I've had the flu. Yeah, it's the first time I've had the flu in a long time, and wow, that was bad. I do not remember much about Monday other than I had a banana, and that was it. Yes, but yeah, I'm better now.
Being sick really suck.
Yeah, it does. Also, last what was it? Last Sunday, so Sunday the 26th, I got to preside over my first Anglican service.
Woot woot!
Yeah, but not as a priest, not even as a deacon, as a basically did evening prayer, and I did a sermon. So that was pretty cool, and I got paid for it. So that was my first Anglican service I ever did.
Nice.
Let's see. My brother is becoming Roman Catholic, and I will be heading down to Florida for that this Easter. So I'm really excited about that. My mom, being a good Baptist, is devastated and has cried herself to sleep multiple times, but that's okay.
So you're excited, though.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. I'd rather he become Anglican or Orthodox, but Roman Catholic will do.
Third best, I guess, right?
Yeah, third best. Ooh, so I showed you something you didn't know about today.
Yes. I don't know how I missed this.
I'm really excited about Alien Covenant. I'm really excited. What did you think of the trailer I showed you?
It was glorious. I'm so excited.
I showed Kingy the Last Supper one for all the Alien fans out there. Yeah, I'm really excited. Oh, and I saw Power Rangers a few days ago too, which that was a childhood memory of mine. Nostalgia brought back.
I was not allowed to watch Power Rangers, so I'm out of the loop.
Which is weird, because we had a very strict family, but my family is perfectly fine with Power Rangers.
Yeah, it was weird. Violence on TV, not okay. Violence in the home, different story. Won't go there.
What about violence under the TV?
See, now that's a little gray area.
What about violence next to the TV?
Well, see, what my mom and dad did when I was in bed at night, I don't know about.
Damn, son.
Except when I couldn't sleep and come out, they usually were just on the couch watching Matlock, so...
Oh, da 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 da.
You got it.
Loved Matlock. Matlock was
a good
awesome.
show.
I loved it. A few episodes, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Don Knotts.
Oh yeah, same here. Okay, so what are we doing today?
Doing your We are talking about how Jesus fixes evil.
Oh snap, that's right. Excuse me. Alright, so you're going to be asking me a bunch of questions, and I will be on the witness stand, and I will tell you that God's not dead. He's surely alive.
Dumb. Are we going to review that movie, or have there been too many people who've done it already?
Too many people have done it much better than we have.
See, that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, we can just make fun of it if you want.
Oh, we could, if you want, yeah.
We can do that now. God's Not Dead is a horrible movie. Please never show it to your non-Christian friends if you ever want them to be Christians.
See, what I can't figure out is the people who make that movie... Are they being serious? Yeah. Are they being serious, or are they trying to create some sort of satire, and the people they market it to doesn't get that they're creating some sort of satire?
No, it's definitely serious.
Okay.
I
I overthink things, but I was.
Yeah, it's definitely serious. Unfortunately, I wish I could say otherwise. Yeah.
And my parents totally have that movie and watch it all the time. God bless them.
Yeah.
Dog bless them, whoever you pray to. Okay, so Kingy.
Yeah.
Please do tell. Okay, now you talked about theism's approach to evil, holding yourself back from Christianity. So, would you talk about what's Christianity's understanding of evil, or where does evil come from in this perspective?
Well, if you recall in the episode about theism and evil, we talked about laying a foundation through theism and sort of Christianity building upon that. So just like take the understandings that I talked about. So for instance, how there's no logical contradiction between God and the existence of evil. But that in and of itself doesn't really help out a lot. You can say, yeah, okay, there's no logical contradiction, but that doesn't mean that God and evil are easily compatible. So what Christianity does is it sort of fills in those holes and sort of builds on top of that foundation. And the way it does so is first by approaching how there is evil in the first place. Now, as we talked about before, there are different types of evil. We're focusing largely on sin right now. But we have what's known as the fall in Genesis account, where you have the figures of Adam and Eve, and they live in a sort of pristine garden, and they're told to sort of tend it to and take care of the earth. And they disobey God's one rule of not eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And because of that, humanity itself and the creation falls. That's where we start off with the understanding of where evil comes from.
Would you talk a little bit about your way of understanding the Genesis account? I know there's quite a range of interpretations, whether more literal or metaphorical. Which do you take?
I'm quite open, honestly, to whatever way to take it. I guess I would tend to see it as more of sort of like figures who sort of represent humanity and represent those choices made. And the idea is that I think all of us would, in that situation, make that choice because of just how human nature is.
So do you... Oh yeah, just to clarify... Do you see there being a literal tree of life, tree of knowledge, talking snake, that kind of thing? Or do you see more of those as images or symbols? Or what's your understanding?
I see a lot of that as symbols, but I'm not opposed to it being taken literally as well. I really am open, but I tend to just see it as sort of like allegory.
Okay. So what's your understanding of the conditions of the world before the fall? Such as, do you see it as an entirely pristine state where, say, there were no predatory species or parasitic species or things of that nature?
Well, judging from like what we know biologically, that's not the case at all. And so I would look at creation itself as evolving from that, and what we would have, I would say, in the story of Adam and Eve is that maybe there was a section of creation that we would call the Garden of Eden where it was pristine. In that, and maybe the job of humanity once they got to an evolved stage at a certain point was for these first humans was to sort of like spread that garden throughout the entire world. But initially we had failed at that, and so because of that failed project, God is kind of having to start all over, sort of thing.
Okay. So what were all the implications of the fall? What exactly did it cause?
The fall caused loss of paradise. So the idea of the garden, that pristine area, we no longer had access to it. So we had to start basically from scratch. There's also the fact that we are now conditioned to be inclined towards our own desires over and against the desires of others. So we see our needs and our desires, and whatever means we use to get those desires, even at the expense of others. So we see this sort of chaos and tendency towards destruction sort of run rampant through human nature. That's probably the biggest problem of the fall.
And you mentioned this pristine state as sort of a failed experiment. How do you reconcile the concept of God's failed experiment with his omniscience or omnipotence?
Well, in the sense that God giving us that responsibility, and we've failed that responsibility. God knowing the fact that we would fail, so for whatever reasons he has, and we'll get into these reasons later, he allowed for us to have the responsibility to take care of creation, despite knowing that we would fail. So I don't see it as a problem, since he already does know about it. If he knows about it, then him still allowing it, I don't see as an impediment to.
So more of he had a greater plan in mind, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So, and I think you've kind of hinted at this in our first part of this discussion, and in the previous dialogue, we talked about the concept of free will here. Would you kind of expand on how this relates in the Christian framework?
Free will?
Yeah, in the created pre-fall, humans created with a free will, why that was necessary, how that congeals with...
Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't make sense to say that you can have a free-willed creature who just sort of perfectly does everything right. If they are free-willed by nature, by necessity, they're going to do things their own way, and each individual is different. So the idea of, God creating creatures with free will, there's no way to have a sort of real, genuine relationship with someone who does not have the capacity for free will. You can emulate a relationship, but you don't have a relationship with your video game characters. Your video game characters do not have free will. They are programmed. Likewise, God created for relationships, so he created the human race. And we as human beings have free will, and the whole point of that is so that we can have an actual, genuine relationship with God.
My initial response to that would be, would there not be a way that the free will could still work within the framework of all things that are good to choose to do, and they still have the ability to freely choose within that without having to choose something evil? If you're going to use your video game metaphor here, I follow you. There's a difference between programming them to do so many types of responses and giving them a free will. But if we're taking God within whom dwells no evil, and God creates these creatures, and there's many different options for what they're able to choose to do, how can he not create someone with free will and still they not choose evil? Does that make sense?
So, like, how can there be free will or how can there be evil when God doesn't have those evil concepts in his own head?
But I wasn't getting to that one just yet, but kind of, because that is kind of twofold, and I'm trying to figure out how to break it down into its pieces, because one piece of it is, how can humans think to do something that God hasn't already thought of? So I believe my response to that will be twofold, and you can take these in each order. One piece of this would be, how can humans or a created being think of or choose to do something that the divine hasn't already thought of?
Well, the idea is that sin itself is a perversion of the will of God, a perversion of the use of tools that God has given people. So it's not that God hasn't thought of them before, in the sense of, like, God knows of their existence. God knows. This gets into a bit of philosophy with what is known as God's middle knowledge. There are three types of knowledge God has. The first type of knowledge is called natural knowledge. This is everything, God knows everything that could happen. Now, the third knowledge is free knowledge. And I skipped over the second for a reason, and I'll explain why. The third knowledge is free knowledge, and that is God knowing everything that will happen. In the middle, there is what's known as middle knowledge, because it's in the middle, and it is God knowing everything that would happen in any given situation. It's counterfactual knowledge. So God knows if I were to go to the store, I would buy a bottle of orange juice or whatever. And in this way, God knows all possibilities of free-willed creatures, including the capacity to sin. So God knows about the knowledge of sin through his middle knowledge, largely, also including his free knowledge, but largely just through middle knowledge, because God knows in whatever scenario what would happen, and sometimes that includes sin. So your question is then, how would creatures do this stuff? Well, because they have a free will, and if sin is defined by going against the will of God, well, if these are different wills, they are not logically commanded to be doing the exact same will as God. So being free, they're able to do something that is different, and many of those different things are going to be then therefore sin.
Don't know if this is rabbit trailing too much, but this makes me think, does it not almost give the created more creative power than the divine?
Why would it be more creative power?
Because now you're giving the created the ability to come up with things to do that the divine doesn't have already, because in God is light and in him there is no darkness.
But it's only a perversion of the thing that's already created. It's not creative, it's perversion.
Okay, now there was a second piece too. I think what we took about 5 minutes here in this discussion. The other piece that I wanted to ask was, you basically equated giving people the option to only do good things with essentially programming a computer, but I would see kind of a difference there. Would there not be a number of enough options that people could choose from under the umbrella of all things good? I mean, if I'm going to use a simile to real life here, under the broad umbrella of career options, you can choose scientific research, you can choose medicine, you can choose sports, you can choose acting, writing. Are there not enough options under the umbrella of all things good that people could freely choose to do without it having to become a perversion?
Well, the problem with that is that it wouldn't be free will then. If you are limiting their ability to choose, that's not a free will. It's like, imagine you program someone and you program them to have free will, where in the sense that if they want to do it, they can attempt it. Now, free will doesn't mean that anything you want to do you can do, it just means that you can attempt it, you know? But then suppose I decide, you know what, I don't want this anymore for this thing that I've made, so I'm going to reprogram it. So they can do anything they want to do, except for they cannot attempt to make a right turn. So everything they have to do is anything that is not a right turn. Well, that's not because of physical limitations. That is, you've actually reprogrammed their conscience. And now their conscience can't even desire that. And you are now then dictating its mind and how its mind works.
So, Kingy, I know that you are a huge fan of Job.
Oh yeah, Job is one of my favorite books of the Bible. Definitely.
That's one of the big books in the Bible that deals with the problem of evil. Would you kind of talk about your understanding of this story and why you feel that it speaks so well to this topic?
I will go over the story of Job first. So, Job is, first of all, I want to point out, it is the oldest book in the Bible by any scholar's standards. Whether, it doesn't matter how conservative or liberal the scholar is, Job is the oldest book generally. And what I love is that the oldest book in the Bible deals with the problem of why bad things happen to good people. So the scene opens up where God is in heaven with the hosts, and Satan comes up one day, and God's like, so, you've been around, walking around the earth, what do you think of my servant Job? And Satan replies saying, oh, well, you've blessed him so much, I bet if he had some bad things happening to him, he would curse your name. And God's like, you think that? Okay, go ahead, do what you want, just don't hurt him personally, kind of thing. So then Satan kills his entire family, takes up his entire livestock, burns his house to the ground, all this weird, crazy, bad stuff. And Job, in 3 seconds, loses everything. And then later on, Satan tries to get him to deny God again, and this time God allows Satan to even hurt him, but just not kill him. So Job gets boils all over his body. And so the friends of Job, the wife of Job who survives, and all these people are just like, curse God and die. What are you doing? You did something wrong, or all this. And his friends are trying to persuade him that he did something wrong, like that he did some sort of sin. And Job has just finally had it, and he's like, God, what happened? Like, I've done nothing but serve you. And God himself comes down and just gives chapter after chapter after chapter of, where were you when I created the world? Where were you when I created the elephants, when I created this, this, and that? Or if you believe Kent Hovind, the dinosaurs or whatever. Because dinosaurs and Job were walking together.
Oh, yeah.
And, but like God says in it, where were you when I formed the Pleiades, the stars, the stars so far up in the sky. And what I love about Job, the book, is that it doesn't really give an answer. not even for you as the reader who as the reader, I know that there's this little game going on between God and Satan kind of thing, but they don't give a reason from God's perspective why he's doing all this. Not even I want to test Job and see. He just is like, okay, do what you want, and he doesn't give a reason to Satan, and he doesn't give a reason to Job, and he doesn't give a reason to the reader. And I think that there's a good lesson that we can learn there. Sometimes we don't have the answers. Sometimes life just sucks.
I hear you. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of seeing this story from the perspective of humans trying to make sense of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm sure with each of our fundamentalist backgrounds, we were each given a very different version of this story. There are a few ways that I would respond to that. First of all, I would express a lot of agreement for some of what you've said. I personally find a lot of beauty in the book of Job, both personally and looking at the piece as a historical work from ancient Judaism, from people trying to wrestle with a lot of difficult questions of why is bad shit allowed to exist? I'm doing all the right things. Why is this happening? Especially because I personally, and I think you've expressed something similar to this, I see it as a form of Judaism kind of evolving from a more simplistic, rigid, do good and you'll be rewarded, do bad and you'll be punished, to a more nuanced perspective. And even the device of God coming in and saying, excuse me, if you're looking at it from the form of humans just trying to figure all this stuff out, they're bumping up against a lot of limitations in their attempts to do so. So I'd first express a lot of agreement that I find this work of art really beautiful myself. Now, would you talk a little bit more about how you understand the wraparound story within the context? Does it not set up some sort of a game where humans' lives don't really matter, such as the lives of Job's family, that God and Satan are almost just playing a game with them or something?
Well, you have to look at this from the perspective of the time it was written in. So during that time, a man's family and livestock were all just property. I don't know too many scholars who would consider this an actual story where there was an actual Job who actually existed. Okay. It's more like an Aesop's fable sort of thing. And so what are the values of a man back in that time? Well, his family is property, his cattle is property, all that stuff. And so these losses are thought of as more of like the losses of my riches kind of thing. Okay. So when you see God restoring it to Job at the end, just replace that with like, well, he got his house back kind of thing, which I mean he got that too, but like that's kind of the mentality that they had. Now as for the beginning with the idea of the game between Satan and God, I think that's one of the most interesting parts of it, because there's not a lot of we read a lot into that. We read that as God testing Job's faith kind of thing. It doesn't say that nowhere I know of where does it say that God is testing Job's faith. It's just sort of like Satan says, "Hey, God, Job would curse you if you didn't bless him so much," and God's like, "Okay, do what you want."
Yeah. The part of the theme of this book is asking a lot of really difficult questions, allowing doubts to be expressed, and then God really gets sort of pissed off at Job for several chapters and then blesses him in the end. What's your understanding of being able to ask those difficult questions or having doubts and God's relationship to that?
Well, one of the best things you can do in the Bible is doubt God and demand answers from him. All the best people do that. You look at Jacob. Jacob was immensely blessed by God, and he wrestles with God, and he was blessed by God afterwards. In fact, he said he wouldn't let go until God gave him a blessing. You look at David demanding answers in the Psalms. You look at Ecclesiastes and such. You see people who are like the best and brightest of God's people demanding answers from him. So I see that tradition starting with Job, where Job demands answers from God. God is angry, gives him answers, but then blesses him.
Okay. So, segueing into our third portion of tonight's talk, Kingy, how the Scrooge is Christianity supposed to solve the problem of evil?
One death at a time. No. So, the center of the Christian faith is not the Bible, it is Jesus. And what is the central...
You offended all the Baptists.
Yeah. And what is the central moment of Jesus' life? His death is the central moment. All of Christianity sort of hinges on that moment. And so, with the death of Christ, there's a variety of what we call atonement theories that a lot of theologians put out, and generally the good principle is, when asking which one of them is true, you say yes, all of them.
That brings back my days in systematic theology class. So much fun.
Yeah. So, there's the healing, for instance, the healing atonement theory, where Jesus, through his death and resurrection, is healing our sicknesses, both spiritual, physical, and such. And there's, the popular Reformed one of penal substitution, where he is satisfying the wrath of God. There's then just the regular substitution one from the Roman Catholic Church. And then there's my favorite, which is called Christus Victor. And it's the oldest one. This is the oldest atonement theory, where Jesus Christ is conquering death. As God himself dying, he is allowing, as God, to have death overcome him. Through being overcome by death, he reveals his power as God, and then he himself then overcomes death. And with that, death itself is dying and will soon die.
Kingy?
Yeah?
You really do need to be a preacher, because I'm an atheist and you just gave me chills. Just gonna say.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do I have to cut that out, or am I going to keep it in?
No, please keep it in. Please keep it
okay.
in.
Okay, cool.
It was beautiful. I was not trying to mock you at all.
Okay. So, when we see Christ conquering death and the resurrection, first of all, with the death of Christ on the cross, we see him bearing the pain of sin and death. And we tend to think of that in a sort of legalistic way, where like, oh, well, now Jesus is blamed for our sin. But no, what we're talking about is that he's actually experiencing the pain of our sin. And because of that, we know that he is with us for every single moment of pain from sin that we have. So not only did he suffer the sort of normal pains of, say, loneliness and betrayal that one has in a regular life, but he's actually bared the sin that we've faced, that we've endured. So he's able to actually empathize with us because of that. As according to Hebrews 4:15, it says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin." And the idea is that this is a God who doesn't tell us from on high, don't sin, or stick to the pain, or something like that. This is a God who says, stick to the pain and I'm there with you through it. And in fact, that's one of the big commands for us as Christians. Galatians 6, chapter 6, verse 2. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. The law of Christ is to bear one another's burdens. And it's actually something that we as Christians have not been doing very well, especially in the United States, because we tend to pretend that those burdens aren't there, because we like to pretend that we're perfect. But a central part of Christianity is bearing the pain of another person, especially another Christian.
So you see Jesus' death not just as a form of forgiving sin. I mean, that's a big part of it, but you also see it as a way of Jesus bearing our hurts and our wounds as well.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yes. And I think that that's one of the things that's missing in a lot of American Christianity, is that we just think of it as a sort of law court thing where, okay, well, Jesus took, the punishment. Glad I didn't have to go through that. Mm-hmm. But no. When I am in the midst of my own pain and sin, struggling with the consequences of that, I know that Jesus Christ himself is bearing that with me and has borne that with me. And there's a lot of great comfort. I mean, I don't know, you're the psychologist for this part, but apparently I would say it seems to make sense that someone who is in pain, if someone else is bearing that pain with them, that really helps a lot, right?
I would very much agree with that. As a therapist, yes. Yeah, if you're going to talk about it as me being there with another's pain, hell yes. If you're going to say that with a client of mine who is a Christian who's understanding it in this way and it's helping them, hell yes. And I'm not saying hell yes to be disrespectful to what you said either. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Trying to figure out what we were going to next here. A few more notes I had. You were talking about Christians being a part of bringing about the redemptive work and the redemptive work and bringing about the higher state or things like that.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's part of our job is as Christians, our job is to expand the kingdom of God, bearing one another's burdens through healing, through feeding the poor, through healing the sick and such. And that way we are lessening the evil. That's how we are conquering death because of the resurrection. So
when you talk of that being the kind of the Christian's job to do, what are your thoughts on secular people or people of other religions who also seek to meet physical or spiritual needs of other people?
Christ says, if you're not with me, if you're not against me, you're with me. I would want to invite them into the Christian faith because I think of it as the fullness of the faith, obviously. But if they are doing good work, I praise God for them.
And then you've said a few times the phrase that this brings about an end to death. Are you talking about an end to physical death or spiritual death or both, or what exactly are you getting at?
Ultimately it would be both spiritual and physical death. But, I mean, this is a work in progress. It's the already not yet, as a lot of theologians like to say. It's eschatology that is being fully realized more and more.
So would you see the end result of that almost being a more highly evolved version of us?
Oh, definitely, yes. If you look at the resurrected body of Christ in the gospel accounts, it's very different. It is they recognize it as him, but they also say it's different. So one of my favorite passages is, I think it's John 21, where Jesus is helping them the resurrected Jesus is helping them take fish out of the boat. And the phrase is something to the effect of, none of them dared ask him who he was because they knew he was the Lord. And I just love that line. It sends chills down my spine. None of them dared ask him who he was because they knew it was the Lord. And just this sort of like, he's familiar, but he's a stranger at the same time. Who is this person? And you see, the body of Christ, resurrected body of Christ, he's, going in through walls and stuff and just doing all these weird things, appearing and then disappearing, but still eating fish, interacting physically with people. And so it's more than a ghost. It's not a ghost, and it is the body of Christ, but it just does all these weird things too. So I would see we will have a resurrected body like Jesus does. So I would see us having those same abilities as well.
Okay. So in that new form, would you say we would be incapable of doing evil, or something else?
I would say that it would make as much sense for us to do evil at that point once we have fully matured and are fully realized as who we are. It would make as much sense for us to do evil as it would for us to pick up, without being too disgusting, a pile of poop and eating it. It's just I mean, now with some people, but like your average person is not just going to do that. So it's sort of like it's a disgusting thing to us at that point. Where
so it's almost a form of creation growing up.
Yes, it's very much a form of creation growing up, yes.
Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to say about this part?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kingy.
Well, thank you.
During my grilling.
You're a good griller.
I know I am.
I'm getting some steak.
I still left
medium
you
rare.
pretty medium rare, definitely.
Yes,
Nice
medium
and
rare.
juicy.
Yes.
Okay, so let's finish this off by a couple of random questions to each other.
All right, Kingy, let me start.
Go for it.
Who is your favorite conservative Republican who is still alive and doing stuff today? So Abraham Lincoln does not count.
Damn it. Gosh darn it. Okay. I'd say my favorite conservative Republican right now would probably be John McCain. There's a lot of his ideals and policies I could get behind. I don't agree with everything, but especially as outspoken as he's been in recent months, I also respect him in that regard as well.
Yeah, I like him a lot.
I really would not be... I mean, I'd have some concerns, but I don't think I'd be too discouraged if he had been elected president.
In 2008?
Yeah.
I used to like Obama a lot, but not anymore. I went back in 2008. I used to be like, yeah, I couldn't, either one I'm fine with. I ended up voting for McCain, but I was just like, yeah, both of them are cool. And then after these 8 years, I was just like, Obama.
I mean, would you take another 4 years of Obama or 4 years of Trump? That's the real question.
Because Obama really messed up, especially in the second. With the Affordable Health Care Act, I have found so many people, friends of mine, who lost their health care, and people who have cancer and stuff. People who lost their businesses. I know one woman who lost her business and her health care. She's basically jobless, and she has cancer.
Yeah,
and it's just. All these sorts of things. The American Affordable Health Care Act really just screwed so many people over. I'm not talking about the super rich, because super rich are super rich. I'm talking about people who make $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year.
Okay.
So that is something I really can't stand. And then all the corruption. I mean, there was a lot of corruption. Just sort of everything from the IRS scandals to. What's some of the other stuff going on? With what's her name, Loretta Lynch, and all that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're going to talk about the Affordable Care Act, it was my realistic hope that whether a Democrat or a Republican had been elected, that some way it could have been tweaked and evolved, because it was. I think in theory it was a good idea, but in practice, yeah, it needed a lot of work. Sadly, what has come out of this administration is a bunch of bullshit.
I don't like this administration either, so don't. Yeah,
I know. I knew. Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say about that is, I think 95% of politicians are kind of corrupt anyway. So,
yeah, true.
Okay, so my question, Kingy,
what? Did
you suggest to make this podcast with me just to convert me?
Oh, totally, Kingy, just totally. No,
I know it. No.
Trapped arg. No. So it started I started thinking because I watched William Lane Craig's debate with Lawrence Krauss, and I saw sort of the reaction Krauss had to Craig in that debate, where it was just, he was very rude, constantly interrupting and all this stuff, and I just kept thinking, there's no benefit to this discussion. And then I saw Lawrence Krauss debating Peter Rollins, and this was actually after the Craig debate, and that one was much more cordial, and it just it flowed better and everything. And I was realizing that yes, part of it is that Krauss is a jerk, but part of it is William Lane Craig is coming there for a fight. He's not coming there to have a dialogue. He's coming there to debate and win. And that's not what Rollins is doing. Rollins is having a dialogue. He wants to have a talk and say, hey, let's see what we agree with and what we disagree with, and let's try to work something out. And I realized that you learn so much more with the second one than you do with the first. I can't remember even a single zinger that anyone did in the Craig debate versus the Krauss one. But the Rollins one I remember pretty well, especially the whole duck thing, the duck suit.
I forgot about that.
No. But, you have a better. He goes something to the effect of what was it? Roland said, "I'm not so much concerned with what people are believing as much as how they are believing it."
Right.
And I thought that was an important thing. Where I do believe it's important to know what you believe, and what you believe is important, but how you believe it is just as important. And so, so that's sort of like what brought me to this idea of just like having two people who can have a good conversation where we're not trying to prove each other wrong or get each other, one up each other or whatever, and just having an actual discussion as opposed to a William Lane Craig versus Lawrence Krauss.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up those two debates as your idea to start this, because I remember when, I can't remember, I think I was just randomly watching the Krauss versus Craig one way back of several months ago, and then you sent me the Rollins and Krauss one, and I remember commenting to you back then, I think this is before I saw the Rollins and Krauss one. When I was watching there's three of them, 3 hour-long debates between Craig and Krauss. And I was thinking, with so many debates, they each say their piece, they each get to respond, but they're not really getting anywhere with each other. They're not really interacting with each other's perspective or hearing each other, and each of them aren't really feeling heard. And I didn't really see that as a very productive way to have a conversation, and I remember commenting to you about that, and it wasn't 2 or 3 months later that you said, "Hey, let's start a podcast," and I was like, "Cool."
Yeah, true story.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, that's why, and totally because I want you to be. Well, actually, I want you to be a Baptist, just to kind of annoy you.
Oh Lord.
You should definitely be a Baptist, Kingy.
I mean, if I was going to go back to being a fundamentalist, I'd at least be a Pentecostal, because then I could just roll around.
At least have some fun with it. Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
Shout and jump up and down. I mean, come on.
Scream and all. Yeah, that would be the way to do it. Yeah.
Okay. I guess this wraps up this episode.
Yep, this has been the Religious Nut and Hellbound Center podcast. Once again, thanks to Leander for our music that you are hearing right now.
Thank you very much.
And
we'll be back next week, same Kingy time, same Kingy channel.
Same Kingy place.
Exactly.
Peace!
And chicken grease.